Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Today we are going to have our second PSAT SAT prep lesson. Last time we worked with words in context, figuring out words using context clues. Today's is going to focus on writing argument. We're going to break down what is an argument in writing, what can we look for to figure that out, and then we'll do a couple practice ones. Now, if we're looking at our first slide here, you do have some notes in front of you. You'll notice that they are guided notes, so you'll just need to fill in some of the blanks. I will underline the words that you do need to fill in. So when we're talking about an argument passage, when a passage on the PSAT is making an argument, we need to start off with what is an argument. So an argument refers to the structure of a passage, where an author is going to present evidence in order to make a claim or come to a conclusion. Right? Now, for some of us that might make sense. When you get into an argument, you're trying to prove a point. And a lot of times the most effective arguments are going to be ones that provide evidence. Now, you'll see these in all kinds of PSAT passages. The most common that they will be found in are in science or history. You will not usually find them in a literature passage, and that makes sense. In a literature passage, that's going to come from a novel where it's not so much making an argument, it's more telling a story. However, in science and history, scientists or historians are going to make claims, and then they're going to provide evidence to support that, to get to their conclusion. So once we know what an argument is, we have to figure out what is the structure of an argument. Now, there are two things that are going to be part of that argument. You're going to have your evidence. Again, anything I'm underlining, you should be filling in. And then ultimately, we're going to have our conclusion. Now, the conclusion can be presented in two ways. It can come at the beginning of an argument, or coming at the beginning of the passage, or vice versa. Now, vice versa is just a fancy way of saying we're going to flip it. So it can either come at the beginning, where evidence will follow, or they will present the evidence first, and they will end with their ultimate conclusion, or their argument. Lastly, once we know what is an argument, what is the structure, you might want to say, how can I identify it? Now again, we said it can come in two places, at the start of the passage or at the end of the passage. Now if it comes at the beginning of a passage, look for those phrases like I believe, we must, or we should. Those are going to be sentence starters that should key you in to let you know the author is about to make their claim. They're about to make their argument, the thing they're trying to prove. However, if it comes at the end, if they're giving all of their evidence first, you might see a phrase like therefore. Therefore in English lets the reader know, I'm about to sum things up. I'm going to let you know what all of that evidence has kind of led up to. So to start off, when we're breaking down an argument, we need to ask, what is an argument? What is the structure? And then ultimately, how do I identify the main idea? Now, what we have on this slide are an example of that argument piece coming at the beginning of a passage and at the end of a passage. So looking at that first one, right, the paragraph reads as follows. We must promote the usage of hydroelectric facilities in developing nations. This is because of the fact that it is cheaper to produce energy using hydroelectric facilities. Now, again, I'm looking for those key phrases that we identified in our notes, and we see right off the bat, it starts with we must promote, right? We might call that a call to action. A call to action is saying this is what we want to do to fix a problem. And ultimately, when you're making an argument, you're going to have that call to action. Another thing that would tip me off in that is in that second sentence, I see the word because, right? We're going to use that word because to explain our reasoning. So in our first sentence, they make their argument. What is their call to action? Their call to action is the usage of hydroelectric facilities in developing nations. So that's an example of it coming at the beginning. But remember, an argument can also be made at the end. So let's read the second paragraph. Cutting trees without proper thought is wreaking havoc on the weather pattern. The average temperature this year has increased by 3 degrees. Therefore, we must decrease the amount of deforestation in the Amazon rainforest. Now again, we look for those words, those key phrases that tip us off that the argument, the claim, the call to action, you can call it any of those, is coming. Again, we have underlined that word therefore, and just like in the first one, it follows it up with we must. Now you might be asking yourself, cutting trees without proper thought is wreaking havoc on the weather pattern. That sounds maybe like an argument, but remember, we're looking for that call to action. What do they want us to do? What is that point that they're trying to really push home? And it's not just that it's wreaking havoc. What do they want to do about it? They want to decrease the amount of deforestation. So there are two examples of finding those key phrases to identify as that argument being made at the beginning of a passage or at the end. Now that we understand what an argument is, where to look for it in the passage, we want to break down the evidence piece, because the evidence can be equally as important when it comes to the PSAT. A question won't always ask, what is the argument? The following question oftentimes is, which piece of evidence supports your answer? So when we're looking for evidence, again, there are key words or phrases that we can look for that will tip us off a piece of evidence might be coming. Now, look out for words like since. In the example before, we saw because. You might see moreover and besides. Those are words that are going to tip you off that a piece of evidence is coming that's going to support that argument. However, if you're reading like a science passage, or it could come in a history as well, you might want to look out for numbers or statistics, because those things are going to also support an argument and help make the claim or that call to action. Now, what types of questions are you going to see based on an argument passage? Again, if we go back to our notes, we said it's very common in history and science, which you'll see in the reading passage. But you will get word choice questions, words that's our words in context, the first lesson, where the word blank most nearly means. You will get text structure. You will see this, where it will ask you to go back into the text. Anytime you see a question that says in lines 99 to, that should maybe be 98 or 102, whatever it is, that should tell you first things first, go back to that line, because it's asking specifically about it. You could also have point of view questions, where in the third paragraph the author takes which side of an argument. You'll have purpose questions, meaning what was the overall argument or the purpose of the passage. And then lastly, we have our reasoning questions. The author reaches his conclusion by. So just understanding what an argument is, what is the evidence being used to support it, right? You could see 5 different types of questions. The last tip when it comes to looking at argument passages, identifying evidence, and really breaking down what a piece of literature is saying is the ability to paraphrase. Now that's something you should hear in your English class, probably in history, science, all of those. We ultimately want to paraphrase. Now what is paraphrasing? The ability to paraphrase is paramount. Paraphrasing is when you essentially take the author's words and you put them in your own. A lot of times that will clear confusion, and when you're able to put it into freshman, sophomore, junior type language in your brain, a lot of times comprehension will go up. So let's look at an example here. It reads as follows. I believe this new doctrine preached by Mr. Lincoln and his party will dissolve the Union if it succeeds. They are trying to array all the northern states in one body against the South, to excite a sectional war between the free states and the slave states, in order that one or the other may be driven to the wall. Now again, I know going through my toolbox of how to break down an argument, I'm looking for some of those phrases that'll tip off, is it coming at the beginning or the end of the passage? Now I see right off the bat, I believe. So that tells me we're leading into our argument. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pull out the main point. I'm going to take it word for word. I know the argument or the point this author is trying to make is that the new doctrine preached by Lincoln and his party will dissolve the Union if it succeeds. Again, we pointed out that I believe, that was our tip. But we don't want to leave it in that. We want to try to take it, consume it, and translate it into language that is more student-friendly for yourself. So I might paraphrase, if it succeeds, the new beliefs proposed by Lincoln's political party will break up, right? So the key here is, I just took that word dissolve, right? That's a science word. I know if I put salt in water, it dissolves, it breaks apart. So I know that it'll break up. So he's saying, if the beliefs of Mr. Lincoln go through, they're going to break up the Union, the North and the South. So again, we've taken our example, we go through our checklist. The first thing we do is we figure out, is it coming at the beginning or the end? What is the argument being made? What is that call to action? Pull it out and then put it in your own words to help that comprehension. Now before we go on to a practice, and then you'll ultimately take one by yourself, let's review the strategies that we went through. The first thing that we want to do is we want to make sure we keep the argument structure in mind. An argument's going to have that main point, that conclusion, that call to action, and then it's going to have evidence. So argument, evidence, those two go together. Be careful, the PSAT and the SAT will interchange words a lot that mean the same thing. Don't get tricked. If it's asking you for the claim, the main point, the main idea, the assertion, the central idea, the conclusion, all of those mean the same thing. What is the argument? If they ask for fact, premise, evidence, again, they all mean the same thing. What is being used to support that argument? Make sure we look for those key words. I believe, I think, therefore, right? Those can tip us off. Is it coming at the beginning or end of a passage? Make sure that you identify that evidence, because a lot of times they're going to have that follow-up question. You said in question 1, this is the main idea. Question 2, which piece of evidence supports that? And then lastly, you always want to try to paraphrase. Put those words into student-friendly language, something that makes most sense to you. It doesn't have to be the whole thing. Pick out those key words that you can translate. Now that we've gone through what an argument is, how to break it down, evidence, all of those things, we're going to do a couple practice examples here. This first paragraph we'll do together. The second one you'll do by yourself. So in this first paragraph, it's going to be discussing the Electoral College. Take 5 minutes to silently read through this by yourself, and then we'll come back together. So now that you've read through the paragraph on the Electoral College, we'll go through those 3 questions. But again, the first thing we want to identify is what is the argument that the paragraph is making. Again, we usually want to look at the beginning of the paragraph and the end of the paragraph. So let's look at the 2 assertions or the 2 arguments that could possibly be made. The top, at the beginning of the paragraph, the argument would state the Electoral College has performed its function for over 200 years. And then it goes on to talk about support. If we jump to that last sentence, it's asserting that the Electoral College is solving problems and it truly speaks to the genius of the Founding Fathers. Now as I read that, the fact that it says has performed its function for over 200 years, making sure support is equal throughout the whole country, that saying it's performed its function over that the Founding Fathers were geniuses, That's an argument. That's something that could be argued. You could agree with, you could disagree with. So when I go through that, I'm going to say the first sentence is the argument. It's the claim that the author is making, saying that it has performed its function for over 200 years, making sure the president has all of the support necessary to run the country. To me, that's something that can be argued. Yes, you could argue the last statement, the Founding Fathers were geniuses, but the paragraph is not about the Founding Fathers, it's about the Electoral College. So that tells me the first sentence is where I've found my central idea or my argument. So we're looking at that first question. Which of the following best represents the main idea? Remember, main idea, central idea, argument, those are all synonyms. They mean the same thing. What is the author trying to prove? So I go through this. Answer A, the Electoral College is not an effective method of selecting the president. B, the Electoral College has been and continues to be an efficient system for electing the president. C, the Electoral College has caused several anomalies in the past that have been labeled as a failure. And the Electoral College is problematic but allows the president to govern effectively. Now, I always want to, if we remember from last time, try to eliminate answers. So the first one that stands out that I can get rid of is A. The Electoral College is not an effective method of selecting the president, because right in that first sentence and throughout the paragraph, it's talking about why it is an effective method to select the president. The next one, again, that I would eliminate is C. The Electoral College has caused several anomalies in the past that have labeled it as a failure. Again, that statement has negative intent, and when I look at that paragraph, it's not talking about the Electoral College not being good, it's talking about it being very strong and solid. So right off the bat, I'm able to eliminate A and C because they have those negative arguments about the Electoral College when overall the paragraph was positive. So I've eliminated my two answers. I go from B, between B and D, and I end up with B. The Electoral College has been and continues to be an effective system. And that goes with that first sentence in the paragraph. We've been using it for over 200 years, and throughout that 200 years, it has been a strong system that makes sure the right person gets in office. So my answer is going to be B. Now, we talked about this in our notes earlier on. A lot of times, the second question is going to say, you made a claim up here, now support it with evidence. So to support the main idea of the passage, the author cites which of the following, that evidence piece. A, that the Electoral College has not allowed the president to govern effectively. B, that a vast majority of states have not adopted the Electoral College. C, that other proposals to abolish the Electoral College have failed. And D, that the candidates will always have popular support through the Electoral College. So again, I'm looking to eliminate two answers. What pieces of evidence, I'm asking myself, tie directly to this? Because they have to go hand in hand. So I said it was an effective system. So right off the bat, again, I'm eliminating A. The Electoral College has not allowed the government to, or the president to govern effectively. That's simply not true. If I break down what the whole paragraph is talking about, it's talking about why the Electoral College has been a good system. So I get rid of A. And again, I'm looking at B and getting rid of it. That a vast majority of states have not adopted the Electoral College. For that, I'm using prior knowledge. I've learned in history class that the Electoral College supports every single state in the United States. It's not something that a state can buy in or sell on. They all are a part of it. A and B are eliminated. I've got rid of two answer choices. Now I'm down to C or D. And when I think about how did they show it was effective, our best answer is going to be C. The other examples or the other ways to elect the president simply have failed. They admitted that in the paragraph. They said other people had put other systems in place to try to elect the president, but they simply did not last. So they always ended up back at the Electoral College. Saying that using other proposals to get rid of the Electoral College have failed, that supports why it has been so successful, because everything else that they've tried simply didn't work. So our best answer there is going to be C. Lastly, it talks about the argument structure. To support his point of view, the author used which of the following strategies to make his argument? That's asking us, how was the argument set up? Is it A, he presents his evidence, then states his conclusion? B, he makes a claim and then supports it with evidence? C, he appeals to the reader's emotions rather than rely on facts? D, he makes his claim by discrediting anyone that does not believe in the electoral system. Looking to eliminate 2 answers. The first thing that stands out that doesn't make sense to me is C. He appeals to the reader's emotions rather than rely on facts. I know that's not true because in the first sentence it gave us a fact of how many years. 200 years it has been in place. So that right there is a fact. It also tells us that other proposals were put forward, but they did not stick. That is a fact because the Electoral College is still being used. So it's not so much emotion, he actually is using facts. And then when I look at A, he presents his evidence and then states his conclusion. I know that can't be correct because we've already identified the argument. And we said that the argument came in the first sentence. So it would not make sense for it to come in the conclusion at the end. We have eliminated 2 answers. I'm between B and D. And when I look those over, B is going to be our best bet. He makes a claim and then supports it with evidence. That's the argument structure. We identified that first sentence was our claim, our argument, the thing our author was trying to prove. And then after that, he lists all of the facts, all of the evidence to support that claim. So when I break that down, B is going to be our best answer. So again, y'all, make sure that you use those strategies that we talked about in our notes. Always look to eliminate 2 answers, go back into the text, and ultimately you should be able to come up with the correct answer. Now that we've gone through strategies, taken notes, and done one as a group, you're going to have this last paragraph. Read it silently by yourself, answer the 3 questions. You'll have about 10 minutes to do that. We'll come back and I'll walk you through the answers. Good luck. So what we had here is from FDR's speech after the Pearl Harbor attack. Again, just like in the previous example that we did as a group, we want to first identify what is the argument the author, FDR, making. So we look at our first sentence and our last sentence to try to identify that. The first sentence is, as a Commander-in-Chief of the Army and Navy, I have directed that all measures be taken for our defense. Whereas the last sentence reads as follows. I ask that the Congress declare that since the unprovoked and dastardly attack by the Japan on Sunday, December 7th, 1941, a state of war has existed between the United States and the Japanese Empire. So I'm looking at which one of those statements is making a claim, making an argument that can go one way or another that needs to ultimately be supported with evidence. And I'm looking for some of those phrases, and I noticed that the last sentence starts with I ask. Right? FDR is asking Congress to declare war, so I see that it makes most sense to go with that last sentence. It's not always going to be the first sentence. Don't get tripped up by that. I've directed that all measures be taken for our defense. Yeah, not really taking a stance that can be argued necessarily one way or the other. In the last sentence, he is asking Congress, and he's made an argument that it is time for us to go to war with Japan. So I'm going to identify the last sentence as the one that's going to be the argument for the entire paragraph. So I've identified that the last sentence is the argument. So now I'm going to my questions. Question 1. Which of the following best represents the main idea of the passage? The United States will have absolute victory. Pearl Harbor attacks have caused a state of war. C, the United States will not take action, and D, FDR has given a formal declaration of war. Now I'm always trying to eliminate two answers. The first that stands out that does not make sense to me is C. The United States will not take action against the Japanese. The reason I'm able to take that out as an answer choice is because when I look at the whole argument, FDR is doing the complete opposite. He wants us to take action. He wants us to do something in response to the Japanese. So I get rid of C. The other one that I can get rid of here is D. FDR has given a formal declaration of war against the Japanese. The reason I'm able to get rid of that is because in the last sentence, which we identified as our argument, he's asking Congress for permission. So he's not telling Congress that we are going to war, he is asking Congress to go to war. So that wording does not make sense. I am left with A and B, and ultimately the best choice is going to be B. The Pearl Harbor attacks have caused a state of war between the United States and Japan. That is what the last sentence is kind of summarizing for that argument. FDR is saying, because of these things, because of the effects, here's where we are at as a nation, and we need to take action. So because of their actions, it is now a state of war between the United States and Japan, and he needs Congress to make that official. Going to 2, FDR organizes his argument by A, describing how they will defeat Japan, B, highlighting pros and cons, C, stating the problem and then a solution, or D, first presenting the effects, then the cause of the renewed hostility. Trying to eliminate 2 answers. A and B are ones that I don't think make sense. A does not fit because he doesn't necessarily describe how we will obtain victory against Japan. He mentions that we will ultimately get there through hard work, but he doesn't lay out an absolute plan. So describing how they will defeat the Japanese does not make sense as how he structures his argument. Also, B, highlighting pros and cons is something I can get away with. At no point does he talk about the pros or the cons in there. That is something you could explicitly look for in the paragraph, and you would find that FDR does not break down the pros and cons. So I'm left with C, stating the problem, then a solution, or D, first presenting the effects and then the cause. I'm going to go back into my argument, and I'm going to break down what is it? Is it more effects? Is it a solution? And ultimately, D is going to be our best choice. FDR starts his argument by breaking down, here is where we are. Here are the effects of Pearl Harbor's attack. And then ultimately at the end, he brings up that this is the cause of renewed hostility. And then again, he's asking Congress for permission to declare war against, or he's asking Congress to declare war against the Japanese. So D is going to be our best choice. Last one, this is a word in context, right? This is what we practiced last PSAT lesson. That's why it was underlined in your passage. The word blinking in the sentence, there is no blinking at the fact, most likely means which of one of the following. Now, what I'm going to go back to my clues from last lesson, and I know one of the context clues that I can use is simply replacing and seeing if the sentence still makes sense. So just quickly going through our answers, there is no squinting at the fact. No, to me that's the PSAT trying to trick you by using the alternate definition. Be careful, that is a big way the PSAT tricks students. They'll use the more common form of a definition where kids quickly circle it because they know it and they move on to the next question. Yes, the more common word that would be associated with blinking as far as closing their eyes would be squinting, but in the context of this article I can get rid of that. There is no closing of the fact. To me, that doesn't make sense. There's no closing of the fact. It does not flow as a sentence. There is no ignoring of the fact. That flows, so I'm going to leave it. And then there is no recognizing of the fact. Again, D does not quite flow. I'm going to eliminate that, and my best choice is going to be C. I've replaced it. I would read the full sentence, make sure it still makes sense, and to blink can be to ignore, right? If you're blinking, your eyes are closed. So there's no ignoring the fact. There's no looking away. There's no closing our eyes and acting like it's not an issue. So what we've had here, you've had your notes on different ways to identify what an argument is, what evidence is, phrases to look for, talked about paraphrasing, hopefully you practice some of that, and then ultimately you guys, you want to eliminate 2 answers for each question. Hopefully you did well on that. Hopefully this lesson was useful for you guys. Remember, the PSAT never stood a chance.